Hello everyone, and welcome to the History Show, a collaboration between the Jacksonville Historical Society and the Communications Department at the University of North Florida. Our guest today is Alan Bliss, a history professor here at the University of North Florida. And Alan will be visiting with us today about the Jacksonville Harbor and the dredging that went on in its history. Alan, welcome.
Thanks, Jeff, for that introduction, and thanks for having me on the History Show to talk a little bit about Jacksonville's seaport history. It's a big part of Jacksonville's history and its contemporary economy, and a big part of Jacksonville's future, something that's been under discussion in recent years. The matter of deepening the channel for JAXPORT's purposes is something that actually has a 155-year history in Jacksonville, and it's something that is often invisible to a lot of the people of Jacksonville, both in its contemporary moment and in its past. The image that I'm showing now is a photo taken from east of the entrance to the St. Johns River out at Mayport. And what you can see in this photo is the two rock jetties that extend out from the beach on either side of the river entrance. And it shows the jetties at the place where they accelerate the water flow in and out of the St. Johns River as the tide comes and goes and the river current flows out into the Atlantic Ocean. And as any experienced boater like you knows, the conditions around the river entrance of the St. Johns River, or almost any river up and down the east coast of Florida, can be lively, boisterous, at times treacherous, depending on the conditions of the wind and the tide. For example, when a strong wind blows out of the northeast, water piles up on the north side of the jetties here at the St. Johns River entrance, and it tries to escape that pocket by ripping around the tip of the jetty and accelerating across the channel. And that's visible in this photo where you can see the swirls of the river water on the north side of the ocean water, and the swells piling up on the north side and then trying to escape around. The ship pilots, the operators of the naval vessels that come in and out of the river entrance are very familiar with this and plan ahead for that depending on the conditions of the wind and the tide. Fishermen and small boaters always have to be, or ought to be, alert to those conditions. The jetties were created to help have the effect of deepening by a natural flow process the navigable channel that leads in and out of the river entrance, and that's a project that dates back to the 1840s. I can show you what used to exist here with this next image. This is an 1853 chart of the entrance to the St. Johns River, and you can also see at the to the north and the upper field of this vision, the entrance to the Fort George River. And that matters in considering the history of the St. Johns River entrance. A lot of water is piled up in the marshes, the wetlands, the tributaries of Sisters Creek, and that whole stretch that leads up to Nassau Sound. When the tide is going out, that water rushes out through the Fort George River inlet, and it sweeps south along the coast. And it tends to carry sand with it that used to, historically, try to block the entrance to the St. Johns River, which didn't have quite the same velocity due to a shallow river entrance, due to the bars that kept developing in that area. And the viewers of this show who are looking at this image with us now can't see the typeface at the very upper right corner of the chart, so I'll read directly the following note that's printed on the chart, written by the map maker back in 1853, and I quote, "No good landmarks can be given for distinguishing the St. Johns River from others such as Fort George. The currents at half tide are strong, and strangers must beware of getting too close to the north breakers, which are steep too after passing the inner buoy. A ripple always marks their limits. The bar is shifting and working to the southward. Ships that drew any consequential amount of water, trading schooners, paddle wheel steamers, and the like that traveled up and down the East Coast, often had to lay to offshore and wait for ideal conditions to try to cross the bar at high water. And the bar absolutely required strict local knowledge, which gave rise to the St. Johns River bar pilots, sometimes called the Mayport pilots, that guide ships in and out of the river entrance. They date back to the very foundations of Florida as a U.S. territory in the 1820s, and they continue to operate from a pilot station just inside the river entrance, directly adjacent to Mayport Naval Station. Well, that 1853 chart note describes the navigation problem that faced mariners until these jetties were constructed, and it was a Jacksonville physician named Abel Seymour Baldwin who was the most vocal early advocate of getting Congress to pay for dredging and pay for building jetties on either side of the river entrance. He was making that argument vigorously as far back as the 1850s. The Civil War interrupted any public works projects like that anywhere in the American South, and it wasn't until 1879 that Congress returned to the matter and acted. And Congress funds this and every other American seaport navigation project and has ever since the 19th century. This next image shows the St. Johns River bar and the entrance just a few years after the 1853 image that we were just talking about. This is an 1850 chart, and you can notice again the proximity of the Fort George River Inlet and the tendency of the current from that to sweep south and cause shifting bars. They've changed quite a bit just in the difference between the 5 years of the 1853 image and the 1857 image. This next chart is an enlargement of a 1918 U.S. Geodetic Survey map. This shows the mouth of the St. Johns River, and you can see on this image the jetty construction, those two dark lines at about near the upper right of the image. Those are the granite jetties that had been in the process of being constructed ever since the 1880s, and that process was ongoing in the 19-teens and the 1920s. They were extended periodically well into the 20th century. But notice something else. There's a railroad on the upland, on the island actually, that connected South Jacksonville with Mayport through Arlington. It was built to move workers and equipment and quarried rock out to Mayport, and once the railroad cars carried the rock to Mayport, it was shifted by a crane onto barges and then carried down to the river entrance where it was actually placed to form the jetties. It took, as I said, 30 years for Congress to get around to appropriating the money for that, so we should be patient, I guess, with Congress's pace in appropriating money for contemporary projects. The railroad no longer stands, but the chief engineer of the project had a house built, which does still stand in Mayport. It's just south of Singleton's Seafood Restaurant, and it's used today by the operator of the Mayport Ferry. This next image is a more contemporary chart that shows the waters around the St. Johns River entrance, and you can see the jetties extending a considerable distance out on either side of the river entrance. You can also see the dredged out turning basin and the wharfs at the Mayport Naval Station. There is a deep channel that allows very large warships, including up to aircraft carriers, to navigate in and out of the Mayport Naval Station. And then very large ocean-going freighters take the mainstream of the channel and follow it around the bend and upriver to the terminals, the freight terminals at Blunt Island, the Trapac terminal at Dames Point, the oil terminals such as Marathon, and then they can travel as far upriver as the Talleyrand terminals, which are just northeast of downtown Jacksonville. This somewhat larger image shows the waters and the channel that lead up to downtown Jacksonville as far as about the Acosta Bridge. And I'd like the viewers to take note of the very large embayments, the shallow waters on either side of the deep channel, and all the marshes and tributaries that lie upstream from the mouth of the river. By channelizing the river entrance with jetties, which we began to do in the 19th century, humans increased the amount and the velocity of the current ebbing and flowing through the channel. And that had the effect, which was intentional, of deepening that channel in a natural way. But by deepening it, it allowed increasing amounts of water to pass in and out of the river entrance that historically had been unable to cross the bar quite so easily. That created a feedback loop that further increased the energy of the river's currents. So, in other words, this relatively simple project begun in the 19th century of building jetties at the river entrance really changed the hydrology of the lower St. Johns River in lasting ways. And the speed of the current at Mayport is pretty easy even for a non-boater to observe. If you're standing on either shore, watch the Mayport River, the Mayport ferry boat. Sometimes it must steer up into the current at a 30-degree or more angle in order to approach its ferry landing on either side of the river. And at times of major high water events, such as a heavy rain that might come with a tropical storm or an extreme high tide stage, a powerful slug of water is forced through the jetties at the river entrance, and that further scours the bottom. We have been perpetually and periodically artificially deepening the river in its navigable channel that works its way further up from the river entrance. There are accretions of sand right around the jetties, but the major work of deepening the river entrance that Jacksport hopes to accomplish in the years ahead will lie further upstream. It's all a fascinating part of the Jacksonville economy and our society, our political life, and something that few people get a chance to see very closely. I hope that interests Jacksonville History Show viewers in paying greater attention to the history of the port.
That's our show. I'm Jeff Graff with the Historical Society. Alan Bliss, thank you for being with us today. You can find out more about this and other subjects by checking out our website at jackshistory.org or calling us at 665-0064. And as always, we're history.